Have you ever noticed that you are the one who always initiates the text or the hangout, only to be met with a delayed response or a polite, maybe next time? In every group dynamic, there is often one person who feels like the backup plan, the one who is included when someone else cancels, but rarely when the original plan is being formed. They are the reliable choice, the person who is always there when the primary friend is busy or when a seat needs to be filled for the sake of appearances. Psychology shows that being consistently positioned as a second choice isn't just a streak of bad luck or a series of unfortunate coincidences. It often stems from early social displacement, perhaps in childhood or adolescence, that shapes a specific psychological blueprint for how we interact with the world as adults. Over time, these individuals develop specific, deeply ingrained behaviors to cope with the subconscious fear of being forgotten or cast aside entirely. These habits are often designed to secure a spot in the room by being as useful as possible, but in a cruel irony, they often end up backfiring. Instead of creating deep, reciprocal bonds, these behaviors inadvertently signal to others that your own needs come last and your presence is guaranteed. Today, we are exploring the 5 specific behaviors shared by people who were never anyone's first choice, examining the research that explains why these patterns persist. Understanding these patterns is the essential first step towards shifting your role from a backup to a priority, both in your eyes and the eyes of others. At the absolute heart of being a perpetual second choice is a psychological concept known as low self-referential worth. This belief system suggests that your value is not intrinsic, but is determined solely by your utility to others, how much you can help, listen, or provide. When you grow up in an environment where you feel disposable, you begin to internalize the expectation of rejection as a default setting for your relationships. Cognitive psychology calls this a maladaptive schema, which functions like a distorted mental filter that colors every social interaction you have. Because you expect to be forgotten, you start behaving in ways that you hope will make you unignorable, even if those behaviors are exhausting. This creates a paradox where the very actions you take to secure your place actually make you feel more like an object than a person. Research suggests this is often a fawning response, a trauma-informed mechanism used to secure social standing by being endlessly agreeable. By focusing entirely on the needs of others, you hope to create a permanent spot for yourself that was never guaranteed through simple existence. However, as we will see, this habit of putting everyone else first often has the exact opposite effect on how others perceive your ultimate value. The first major behavior is chronic hyperavailability, which is perhaps the most common outward sign of someone who feels they are a second choice. Psychology shows this behavior is often a fawning response, where you attempt to appease others by being as convenient and agreeable as humanly possible. You might find yourself dropping your own important personal plans the moment someone else calls with a last-minute invitation or a request for help. This stems from a deeply rooted fear that if you say no just once, you will never be asked again and will be permanently removed from the rotation. You feel that your inclusion in any social circle is a fragile privilege you must maintain through constant attendance rather than a solid, effortless right. The psychological consequence of this is that you stop being perceived as a person with a life and start being seen merely as a reliable resource. When you are always there, regardless of how you are treated, others stop seeing your time as something valuable that must be earned or respected. Research suggests that overavailability actually reduces your social status in the eyes of the group because it signals a lack of self-importance. By being too easy to reach, you reinforce the very dynamic where you are only called when everyone else is busy or unavailable. The second behavior is the consequence of that presence, accidentally signaling that your own life has very little momentum or independent purpose. Cognitive psychology identifies the scarcity principle, where human beings naturally link value to limited availability or difficulty of access. When you are always at someone's beck and call, your presence becomes a low-cost commodity in the social marketplace of your friends and peers. People naturally prioritize relationships and resources that are harder to obtain or that require a higher level of mutual respect and planning. If you never have a prior commitment, You unintentionally communicate to others that your time is worth nothing to you, and therefore, nothing to them. This reinforces a painful dynamic, where you are only considered for an outing or a conversation after everyone else on the list has already declined. The real-life consequence is a social circle that treats you as a convenient placeholder rather than an essential, valued member of the group. Psychology suggests that establishing boundaries is actually what makes your presence feel significant and weighted to those around you. Without these boundaries, you remain in the backup category, perpetually waiting for a call that only comes when it's convenient for someone else. Third, many who feel like a second choice unconsciously adopt what cognitive psychology calls the chameleon effect on an extreme level. Research suggests that mirroring others is a natural social lubricant used to build rapport quickly, but for the backup friend, it becomes a survival strategy. You might find yourself shifting your opinions, your tone of voice, and even your core interests to match the person you are currently with. The underlying psychological goal is to minimize friction and ensure that you are never the cause of conflict or disagreement in the group. By being a perfect mirror, you hope to become indispensable to the person you are reflecting, making them feel seen and heard so they will choose you. But the real-life consequence is that you never develop a distinct, memorable personality of your own that others can actually connect with deeply. People are often drawn to those with strong, authentic edges, clear personal boundaries, and unique perspectives that challenge them. When you have no edges, you become invisible, easy to overlook when someone is making a high-stakes first choice decision about who to spend time with. By trying to be everything to everyone, you end up being nothing specific to anyone, cementing your role as the interchangeable backup. The fourth behavior is frequently overextending yourself by performing favors, providing help, or giving gifts that no one actually asked for. Psychology shows this is a transactional approach to social belonging, born from a deep sense of inadequacy. Deep down, you may feel that your presence alone, your personality and companionship, is not valuable enough to keep people interested in you. To compensate for this perceived lack of value, you try to become the most helpful, useful, or giving person in the entire social group. You might offer rides across town, buy expensive dinner for others, or act as an unpaid, 24/7 therapist for everyone else's problems. Research suggests that this overgiving is often a subconscious attempt to buy social insurance against the possibility of abandonment. The tragic real-life consequence is that you tend to attract people who only value you for what you can provide, rather than who you are. When you eventually stop performing these favors due to exhaustion, these individuals often disappear because the transaction is no longer profitable. This pattern reinforces the very belief you were trying to escape, that you are only a backup whose worth is tied to your utility. This constant need to be useful inevitably leads to the role of the perpetual emotional caretaker, the person everyone calls to vent their frustrations. You become the designated listener for everyone's crises, but when it's your turn to speak, you find the room suddenly gets very quiet or the topic changes. Psychology shows that this creates a severe imbalance in emotional labor, leaving you feeling hollow and used despite your efforts to connect. You provide deep empathy and active listening for hours, but you rarely, if ever, receive that same level of attention in return. Research suggests that being the listener who is never heard leads to a specific type of profound psychological exhaustion known as compassion fatigue. Cognitive psychology notes that this dynamic fosters a slow-burning sense of resentment that you might feel guilty for even having. You start to realize that you are only valued for your ability to absorb others' pain, making you a first choice for misery, but a second choice for fun. The ultimate consequence is a total depletion of your own emotional reserves, leaving you with nothing left for yourself. When you finally run out of the energy required to care for everyone else, the social connection often snaps because there was no foundation of mutual care. The fifth behavior is a common but confusing one: anticipatory withdrawal from social groups or close, burgeoning relationships. Psychology shows this is often a sophisticated defense mechanism designed to prevent the sharp pain of being excluded yet again. If you are used to being the second choice, you naturally expect to be eventually forgotten as newer, better options come along. Cognitive psychology describes this as the leave before I'm left mindset, a preemptive strike against your own potential heartbreak. By pulling away first, you maintain a temporary sense of control over the rejection, telling yourself it was your choice to be alone. You might stop replying to messages, decline invites you actually wanted to accept, or become cold and distant just as a relationship gets serious. The psychological logic is simple but destructive. If you aren't present and active, you can't be chosen last or rejected in public. The consequence is that you reinforce your own isolation and inadvertently prove your fears right through a self-fulfilling prophecy. Others interpret your distance as a lack of interest or even arrogance, causing them to stop reaching out entirely, which validates your feeling of being second. Finally, you may frequently minimize your own needs, desires, and opinions to avoid being seen as an inconvenience to the primary group. Cognitive psychology calls this behavior self-silencing. A strategy used by those who feel their place in a relationship is highly conditional. When asked for your preference on dinner, a movie, or a vacation spot, you likely respond with "I don't care" or "whatever everyone else wants." You believe that having no opinion makes you easier to keep around, as you never cause friction or demand anything from others. However, by never stating what you want, you prevent others from ever knowing the real you, making you feel interchangeable and forgettable. Research suggests that authenticity, even when it causes minor conflict, is a key component in becoming a first-choice priority for others. When you suppress your needs, you are effectively telling the world that your desires don't matter, and eventually, the world starts to believe you. This leads to a life where your schedule and happiness are dictated by the whims of those who put themselves first. Reclaiming your voice and stating your preferences is a vital act of self-assertion that signals you are no longer willing to be a secondary option. When you combine these 5 behaviors, hyperavailability, mirroring, overextending, withdrawal, and self-silencing, you create a powerful psychological loop. This loop essentially trains the people around you to treat you as a placeholder, someone who fills a gap until the real person arrives. Because you are so convenient and demand so little, you naturally attract individuals who are looking for convenience rather than deep, reciprocal connection. Psychology shows that we tend to attract the level of respect that we demonstrate for ourselves, creating a self-reinforcing social reality. If you act like a second choice by minimizing your presence and maximizing your utility, the first choice, people will rarely find a reason to seek you out. Research suggests that breaking this cycle requires a radical shift in how you perceive your own cost to others. You must realize that being easy isn't the same as being loved, and being useful isn't the same as being valued. The placeholder role is a prison of your own building, intended for protection but resulting in isolation. Understanding this dynamic is painful, but it is the necessary catalyst for choosing a different path moving forward. To break this pattern, psychology suggests starting with cognitive reframing, changing the way you talk to yourself about your social value. Instead of asking, "How can I make them like me?" start asking, "Do I even like how they treat me?" Research indicates that setting small, firm boundaries is the most effective way to begin retuning your social dynamics. Practice saying no to a low-stakes request, even if you are available, just to prove to yourself that the world won't end. Cognitive psychology notes that as you stop fawning, the people who only valued your utility will naturally drift away. This can be painful, but it clears the space for people who are capable of seeing you as a first choice and a true priority. Shifting from external validation to internal self-advocacy means learning to be your own first choice before seeking it from others. This involves identifying your own needs and expressing them clearly, even if it feels uncomfortable or risky at first. The goal is to move from being a resource to being a person, and that transition begins with how you treat your own time and energy. Being no one's first choice for a long time can make you feel like you are inherently less than those around you, but psychology tells a different story. It is not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of the behavioral patterns you adopted to survive in a world where you didn't feel seen. By recognizing these 5 behaviors, the fawning, the mirroring, and the overextending, you can begin to consciously dismantle the backup persona. Reclaiming your space, your voice, and your right to say no is the path toward a life where you are valued for your existence rather than your utility. Remember that the most important person you will ever need to be the first choice for is yourself. When you finally choose yourself, the world eventually learns how to follow your lead.